Hello everyone, it's GigaBeef here, and today we're going to be talking about grenades. So stick around and let's get going. I've been meaning to make this video for a while, so thanks to Seth the Butcher from the community who reminded me to actually get on and do it. So today we're going to go through everything about grenades, starting with the items themselves and how they work, how to buy and make them, and finish up with the various use cases, of which there are many, which is the reason that they are a key component of high-level gameplay and should be part of yours as well. So let's dive right in and first look at the grenades that actually kill people. In order of fuse times on the frags, we have the VOG25s with a 2-second fuse up to the M67s with a 5-second fuse, and the other three are somewhere in between at 3 and 3.5 seconds to detonation. This is the time that it takes for a grenade to explode after leaving your PMC's hand, and is probably the most important difference in my opinion between the various grenades, as it heavily dictates how they actually get used. It's important to note in Tarkov that you can't cook grenades, i.e. you can't artificially shorten the timer by pulling the pin out and holding onto the nade for a bit before throwing it like you can in some other games, and I don't think there's any plan for the developers to add this given how good grenades are already. With this information, you've probably already guessed or experienced firsthand the pain of getting vogged, as I like to call it. These are used primarily close up, as the 2-second delay gives you very little time to react by the time that it's got to you, for example down the office corridor. M67s on the other hand are great for forcing player movement and confusing people with its long timer, but more on this later. Ah! Well, that's just sad, isn't it? There are two other special grenades as well, the Zarya flashes with a 2-second fuse, which is pretty short, and an RDG smoke grenade with a 3.5-second fuse. However, this doesn't really mean anything, as these smoke grenades are quite useless. There are more effective smoke grenades supposedly being added soon TM, but right now the only interesting thing about them is that thermals can see through the smoke, so use that as you will, but otherwise it takes way too long for these to deploy to be of any real use. The flash nades are also pretty underused, especially now, and previously they had to be used for the flash PMC kill quest, but now that you can do it with the KS-23 shotgun, you don't really need to use them anymore. They are typically quite cheap though, so if you just want to take in any grenade at all with you on a budget to spook an opponent by throwing it at them, they can do the trick. So back to the nades that go bang. Interestingly, but not surprisingly, the weight of a grenade affects the distance that you can throw them. With a weight of 0.25 kilos, you can throw the VOG25 the furthest, well, technically speaking. The others are somewhere around 0.3, and at 0.6 kilos the F1 is the standout, being by far the heaviest. Given the VOG's fuse, it is actually hard to get them to go anywhere before they go off, because they're only 2 seconds before they do. The 17s and the RGDs are around the same, and the F1 does throw short, but do note that these nades can roll quite a long way along the ground when they land, so it's not as bad as it might seem at first. Given this, the M67 ends up going the furthest simply because it's travelling for longer. When it hits the ground, it can roll and go further than the other grenades. There's also another parameter on these grenades called throw strength. I'll be honest, I have no idea what this does. Any ideas? Let me know in the comments because I'm all ears. So now that we've got our grenade to its target, how does the damage model work? Well, primarily there is a blast radius that deals damage and straight up kills you if you're within its range. And then there is also technically shrapnel, but more on that in a moment. The frag radius ranges from 2 to 6 meters on the VOG17 and 3 to 8 meters on the M67. Now, I don't know for absolute certain, but I strongly suspect that inside the first number you die for sure, and damage scales in between the first and the second, and does no damage after that. Because damage definitely drops off as you move away, you could be surprisingly close to these grenades when they go off with no damage at all. Shrapnel is often wondered about by players, and there is some really detailed information contained within the wiki, with the number of fragments released for each grenade, their speed, and even fragment stats themselves, which act like bullets within the game's engine. RGD, F1 and M67 shrapnels are all modelled separately, with the VOGs sharing the F1 shrapnel in the case of the 25 and the RGD shrapnel in the case of the 17. But does any of this mean anything practically? With either 90 or 100 meters per second speeds, this means that technically fragments could travel over 1 kilometer if blasted out at 45 degrees. However, the likelihood of these fragments in general hitting you is very, very low, to the point that it's difficult to know if the shrapnel is actually working as intended even at close range. You can see the effects cosmetically in game as the fragments bounce off the local environment, and there are reports that you can in fact die to shrapnel fragments that you see here and now on Reddit, but it's so incredibly unlikely that we're going to put it in the category of too inconsequential to worry about. It just doesn't happen enough to have an influence upon our playstyle or our decision making at all. There's another stat which is listed on the wiki, which is the contusion radius, and this is supposed to be the radius within which you get that effect when you get hit by a headshot but it ricochets. This should be similar with grenades. However, in offline mode, I was unable to get this to trigger at pretty much any distance at all, so I'm not sure if this is actually active, to be honest, because it definitely used to be there, and if you look up some old YouTube clips of people getting grenaded, it definitely was in the game a few years ago, but doesn't seem to be anymore. In short, don't stand near grenades and you won't die. There was a commonly circulating tip regarding lying down with feet pointing away from the grenade, which was supposed to work because if you're standing up, you'll get hit by a lot more shrapnel and into areas that matter like the thorax and the head, and you won't be protected and have them deflected by your feet and your legs. After watching it and thinking about it again, given shrapnel is for all intents and purposes not a mechanic now, practically speaking, just putting your body away from the blast radius is all that seems to help mitigate the damage. So if you're in a standing position and you turn and lie down in the opposite direction to the grenade, your feet are in the same place as they would have been before, but your body is now further away, which leads to less damage overall. This is certainly not definitive, but in my testing, it definitely feels this way. One point that I will mention is that testing grenades is especially annoying because if you get it wrong, you die and you have to reload in again. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on how to get the various grenades, but there are multiple sources. You'll get grenades either from finding them in raid, either in boxes or on scavs and most likely raiders, cash purchases and barters with the traders, crafts in the hideout, or buying them from the fleet directly. Within the traders and the hideout, VOG 25s can only be made in the workbench level 1. VOG 17s can be bartered with mechanic 1, RGDs can be bought or bartered with Prapor or crafted, and F1s and M67s can be bought or bartered with Prapor for F1s and Peacekeeper for the M67s. M67 grenades are needed for the no offense quest with Prapor, so it's useful to keep some Zibbos to do this if you don't have access to the flea market yet and you want to complete all of Chemical and annoy Prapor by handing in the goods to Skier. A couple of other random points before we move on how to use these. Number 1, you can throw grenades at an insane rate if you have no weapon equipped at all, as there's no animation to go back to whatever you had out previously. You can try this out in offline mode by dropping a weapon and melee slot item and just throwing grenades one after the other with the G key. Number 2, you can bind grenades to the number keys like an ordinary item if it's in your rig or pockets, which lets you throw it as usual with left click after equipping it, or do an underarm throw with right click. And number 3, grenades have a tendency to roll left due to their model. This is useful to remember when throwing in narrow areas or throwing grenades down corridors. So finally, onto the usage. How can we get best use of our grenades? Well, counterintuitively, killing someone is normally not the primary expectation of grenades. The threat of death, however, allows us to do some interesting tactical things. Firstly, we're going to talk about area denial. Imagine 2 players see each other at medium distance. One player throws a grenade from behind or around cover. The other player then cannot just be continuously aiming or peeking the angle without risking getting killed by the grenade, so either has to move or stay behind safe cover depending on the terrain. Part of the beauty of grenades as a tool is you can't be certain exactly where it's gone when you get one thrown at you, which makes them super dangerous to second guess when you're on the receiving end. Another example is being pursued in a fight where you're trying to disengage. Throwing a grenade behind you along your path forces your opponent to either pause or let the grenade go off, giving you time to escape, or take another path which is hopefully slower. I find I use this tactic a lot whilst playing solo, as my playstyle involves a lot of flanking and larger movements on the map, which is incidentally also why I tend to favour wide open areas on most maps, but this helps to deal with duos and trios to sow some confusion amongst the opponent. Next, on forcing movement. This is just as important as area denial, and is related in its effect. The most obvious example is sending grenades after exit campers or players camping rooms once you know they're in there. When the grenade arrives, they have the choice between running out or staying inside and risk a high likelihood of dying. The biggest advantage that you have when playing solo against multiple enemies is their communication and them having to keep track of each other, and if you can force them to move around quickly, it can make their comms hard to keep up with, leading to confusion. The last thing that you want is to allow a careful and measured approach on your own position by an enemy team where all of your opponents know easily where each other are. The same thing goes for bushes. Outside, if you lose an enemy, sometimes all it takes is a little audio information to get a good enough bearing to be able to throw a grenade somewhere in their general direction. As they won't know exactly where it went, many players when hearing the grenade sound will attempt to move. This is the value of bringing at least one grenade, and even a flash will do sometimes, as your opponent won't know which type it is until it goes off. Pushing corridors is also why you see such high grenade use on labs. Players can get stuck at different angles, and grenading these corners can help to dislodge a stalemate and also force the opposition to reposition, which might be tactically disadvantageous for them depending on where you are in the map. This is where the advanced technique with the M67s can come into play, where you throw a nade around a corner and run straight over it. The 5-second timer is long enough for you to run past, shoot the enemy in the back as they run, and then go off behind you, leaving you unharmed. Finally, straight up killing enemy players can be a desired outcome, and for this I would recommend the VOG-25s, as I said before. These give such little time to maneuver, they're definitely the best for getting direct kills. If you time these right, you can even get them to go off in the air, which is very hard to counter at the right distance. The very last thing I wanted to mention is around grenade armor damage. Now I'm pretty sure these still don't deal damage to player armor, which is awesome for looting when you get kills with the nades, however I'm not 100% certain on this. I have a clip here where I killed 2 players in a duo with a nade. One died straight up to the RGD5 and his kit was completely intact, whereas the other had some damage, and this was right at the start of a new raid. Whether that damage was there before and just unrepaired, I'm not sure, but it could also have been some shrapnel damage effect from being so close to the explosion, so I can't be 100% certain that this is correct, and that's why I left it right to the end. But do let me know if it's been proven either way, and I'll try to stick it in the description later on. If you learned something or enjoyed today's video and want to support the channel, please as always consider sending a like and a comment, as it helps with visibility for those who haven't found me yet on YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter and Twitch to check out when I'm live, which is currently 2 times a week, once on Friday at 9 PM UK time for the real-time recording of the ScavTalk podcast, which you can check out the link to in the description below, and a regular Tarkov stream on Saturday at 2 PM UK time in the afternoon. And with all that said, I'll see you next time, and as always, have fun in your raids.